In business, it's easier to feel confident and in control when conditions are idyllic, profits are high and growth is steady. But what do you do when a storm hits? How do you turn things around and not only weather that storm, but emerge stronger? Today, in a special episode recorded at McLaren Technology Centre, we answer the big question: what does it take to turn things around?
They had to kind of believe in, we're ninth in the championship, but here's going to be our strategy to get to winning the world championship.
And I always like to have an agitator in that team. Somebody who's really going to kick it. And sometimes you're like, oh, did I really want an agitator in the team? I did.
But mistakes, I think, so the day that goes by that you aren't doing something that you could have done better.
I don't think you'll ultimately get the commercial turnaround and performance that you want without the culture coming with the organisation.
Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. I'm Lizzie Elston and I'm delighted to be joined today by my co-host Annie Wong. Hi Annie.
Hi.
And we're outside the studio today, a little bit like the last one we did together, Annie. We are at the fantastic McLaren Technology Centre with two incredible guests. Turnarounds are challenging. In fact, within business, 70% of them fail. And the weight of expectation can test even the most experienced leaders and teams. So what can we learn about the mechanics of managing a successful turnaround from the people who have done it? Today we're answering the big question: what does it take to turn things around? Annie, who are we joined by today?
Today we are joined by Zak Brown, CEO of McLaren Racing. Welcome, Zak. Thank you so much for having us and for hosting us.
I'm glad I didn't know about that 70% statistic. I might not have tried.
Get that out of the way first.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're also joined by Pauline Biddle, a partner at Deloitte in our M&A practice. Welcome, Pauline.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So to kick us off, can you both just tell us a little bit about your careers so far and your experience of business turnarounds? Zak, I'll come to you first.
My career so far, I used to race professionally in the early 90s for a decade. And then when I was done racing, I became good during my racing career at sponsorships, partnerships. So ultimately ended up starting an agency that represented the corporate side of the sport. So clients were the Deloittes of the world as opposed to the McLarens of the world, helping them identify how they could use motorsports to build their business, whatever the various goals and objectives were. Sold that 20 years later and then got the opportunity to join McLaren. And having always been a racer, it was a dream job for me. And it was kind of the first turnaround because my company was more of a build it, but in the early days of a startup kind of feels the same as a turnaround. So a lot of the same applies because you're kind of in a I hope I make it to next Friday mindset for quite some time. So while it wasn't a turnaround, I could see a lot of similarities in how I tackled building my company versus helping turn around McLaren.
Pauline, what about yourself?
So I am a mergers and acquisitions partner at Deloitte. I've been doing that role for about 30 or so years. So a lot of work with clients. You say turnarounds, I agree. A company changing path, changing strategy, growing different areas. So lots of work on that over the last 30 years with clients. So looking from the outside in, which is interesting, and some work with McLaren over the last few years, particularly on looking at financing and some of the key requisites for a turnaround or for a change in strategy. But also leading parts of our business where I have been responsible for running the operations and turning around bits of our business, so taking them in a different direction.
Very good. Well, I think we've got the right guests. So let's start. Unusually for this podcast, let's get right in at the deep end to start with. And the moment where perhaps you as a leader know things aren't working completely as they should be, and something needs to be done. What's the first thing to do when trying to understand the challenge ahead and prepare for it, both as an individual and an organisation? Zak, maybe you can tell us a bit about McLaren.
Yeah, I think when I joined McLaren, I knew we were in trouble. We'd finished ninth in the championship. We had a record low of partnerships. There was fan dissatisfaction, employees. So other than that, everything was going great. And but it was even worse than I thought. And I didn't recognize that until I got in. I think the most important starting point is trying to rally the team because it's people that are going to get you going the right direction. And that's easier said than done when you have 1,000 people who aren't in a good place. It's not as simple as, hey, everyone, here's what we're going to do. Get on board. You got to bring them along on the journey, and you have people that are on board from the word go. Those are the easiest. Then you have those that are kind of on the fence and they're a bit skeptical but want, and then you have those that actually maybe this isn't where you should work because you're part of the problem, if you'd like, of not being in line with the culture's values, the direction of the team. And then I think in a turnaround, you have people that have been knocked down the mountain that need to reclimb, and sometimes that's harder because they're set in their ways and they were once there and now they're not, and so they've lost confidence. You got to kind of focus on a few things and get it right, because I think things are about momentum. And when you're in a turnaround, you need to reverse the momentum, which has been rolling you downhill. How do you kind of stop the rolling downhill and get the momentum going the other way? And I think you do that through people, but with some simple, clear objectives. Don't try and kind of boil the ocean from the word go. Be like, you know what, we got to get these three things right, and that'll start giving us some momentum.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. And Pauline, within business, are there kind of key indicators and metrics to pay attention to during those early days of a turnaround?
Yeah, definitely. Understanding the size and scale of the challenge. I think you've articulated that, Zach. And to me, there's a few bits on that I particularly focus on. We talk about culture, because when a business is in that position, there will be funny things that have happened. And there will be a culture probably reset that needs to happen. And it depends on how big that culture reset is and how significant that is. I think the other thing is financing. What have you got in terms of resources to fund that turnaround? You mentioned the startup. I think that's a classic one in terms of the financing and the funding piece of that. And then being able to look at the pace at which you need to go at, because obviously that will be dictated by funding and resources a lot. And then being able to articulate a mission. I love a mission. Yeah. As you say, 2 or 3 simple things, which is, standing back from it all before you get into the detail of the actual mechanics of enacting that turnaround, being clear on those 2 or 3 things that are going to make the difference and are the reason why you're doing it. Because I think when you come on, and we'll probably come on to this in a few minutes' time, when you're halfway or quarter way through and you're thinking, right, are we doing the right thing here? You will have moments where you stand back from this, right, what was that mission? So I think having a really clearly articulated mission to start with is very helpful.
What's your view on the role of transparency when it comes to having that clear mission? Because I think there's a balance between wanting to articulate the challenges and the problems in a really authentic way, but also not necessarily wanting to contribute to or perpetuate the low morale or panic in people. So how do you get that balance right between communicating a clear message and being clear about the problems without panicking people further?
I think transparency, we had a trust issue when we joined here because of lack of transparency, and then people saw ghosts on the factory floor, and there was a mindset of people were guilty until proven innocent. So I think the only way to tackle that is through as much transparency as possible. Obviously, there's things that are confidential. Never lie, right? If you can't disclose something for whatever reason, fine, you can't disclose it, but never mislead. And I took a very transparent, very open and honest, I'm going to take the view that I trust everyone in here and let everyone know that if anything's breached, they're not letting me down, they're letting their teammates down and their families down. The consequences for the business if you have kind of loose lips or people chat. I've not had that trust broken. So I think total transparency when you can, and hopefully be as much as possible. I went the kind of, I'd rather be overly transparent than hold back, kind of take the risk. Shouldn't panic people, because even if they're, they obviously know things are going well, but you should be presenting a plan on how you're going to fix it. So you shouldn't be presenting anything that's doom and gloom that you don't have an answer for. Then you would be panicking the troops. But if you're like, hey, we got this problem, but here's how we're going to fix it, then I think that's where you get them all on board. And I think the more transparent you are, the more they understand, the more you start taking some of the ghosts out of the system and the speculation and the rumors by, hey, you may have heard this, but let me tell you what's actually really going on. So I think transparency is critical, really in any situation in business, but especially in a turnaround situation.
And I think it's clear you've done so much to do that and drive transparency, even with the public, like myself watching Drive to Survive. I feel like I've learned so much.
Transparencies, and don't use cute, big, funny words and kind of talk around things. Don't be a politician with some of your answers. Just kind of call it as you see it. And I think that gets people on board.
I've heard you talk about when you came in, there was quite a blame culture. How did you sort of eradicate that?
Getting people to appreciate everyone else's departments and their role. When I came in, we've got one race car, so we can kind of blame that person on that part of the race car, but it's the same race car we're all working on.
Right.
So it was about admitting your mistakes, encouraging to admit mistakes, learning by your mistakes, embracing mistakes. I think mistakes are great learning experiences. What I always say in the factory is just don't make the same one twice, because then you haven't learned along the way. But mistakes, I think, it's not a day that goes by that you aren't doing something that you could have done better. So getting people in the mindset of embracing, learning, and improving, recognizing that actually, whether it was a mistake or you could have just done it better, is a great way to drive an organization forward for incremental success. And then, rarely does a mistake happen as it a single person. You can usually kind of track back that actually they maybe made a mistake because they weren't that well informed, because this person didn't have as much information as they should. So I think there's no point in kind of going, it's your fault.
Talking a bit about pressure, which invariably comes with these sorts of turnarounds and trying to get back to a successful place. And clearly there can be limited time, abilities, resources. I'm just wondering, how do you focus resources effectively when the odds might be against you? And how do you move quickly but strategically? I wonder, Pauline, perhaps, is there a greater level of risk for businesses when they're trying to make decisions under pressure? And how do leaders mitigate that?
Yeah, undoubtedly, in a high stakes, high pressure environment and the decisions really matter, because they could be the difference between the organisation surviving and not, then definitely you're going to be acting under pressure. You are acting under pressure. I think having a small but trusted team around you to make sure that you can share those ideas, minimise hopefully the ideas that don't work and aren't going to fly, but also your board, your leadership team around you as well, utilising those people. And I always like to have an agitator in that team. Somebody who's really going to kick it. And sometimes you're like, oh, did I really want an agitator in the team? I did, and I do. But it's great to have that agitation as a leadership team inside the tent rather than outside the tent, because I like that agitation before you go out, in terms of with your plan, with your next stage, and how you're going to enact that. So, yeah.
That's interesting.
So we've spoken a lot about turnaround in the context of the organisation. So whether it be resources, leadership, transparency, culture, etc. What about externally? So Zak, you mentioned partnerships, and under your leadership, McLaren has doubled its partnerships to over 60 now. Why has that been so important to you, and what do you look for in a really good, strong commercial partner?
I think the same principles apply. Transparency. When we had partners join us on our kind of quest to get back to winning the world championship, they had to kind of believe in, we're ninth in the championship, but here's going to be our strategy to get to winning the world championship. And so transparency is a critical part of that, so people understand, okay, you have an idea of why you got to where you are, and you have an idea how to get out of that. And then our partners, we have two types of partners, B2B if you'd like, and consumer. And outside of the obvious economic contribution they make to go in racing, it's not an inexpensive sport. That's kind of old sponsorship, write a check, logo on the car. Now our partners are fully integrated into our business. And if they're a consumer, we're relying on them to help extend our brand, help engage and get new fans. And that's critical, because without fans, there is no sponsorship, there are no TV rights, there is no McLaren without fans. So our consumer partners help us with our fans outside of just the economic contribution. Our B2B partners, the Deloittes of the world, the Ciscos, the Dells, they're integrated in our business, in Deloitte's case, helping us a tremendous around sustainability, critical to our business. Everything leads to performance on the race car. So that's where our partners are critically important, and where our partners are best in class is how can they help us run our business more efficiently.
It's really interesting you mentioned integrated, because I suppose I was thinking, what's the difference between engaging a Deloitte of this world for service as opposed to actually being a partner? And I think what you've just said about being very integrated with your business is
we have
makes it
a kind
different.
of a moonshot idea that we'd love to have the first team to ever have a fully circular race car. And we're doing that with Deloitte and the FIA. So of course we work very closely with Deloitte with their, call it, traditional services, if you'd like. But the partnership stretches much beyond that into how can we have Formula One a better run business. And so some things we do are purely for McLaren's benefit. I think some of the stuff that we're doing with Deloitte is actually going to be for the industry's benefit.
Brilliant. Pauline, what about from an M&A perspective? Where have you seen partnership really help when it comes to turnaround?
Transformations, turnarounds, M&A is frequently about partnerships, venturing. I think if you look at cost of transitioning to new technologies, energy transition, a lot of our clients are coming to us saying, we're looking at a venture, a partnership with another party to help co-fund that, to bring the right skills to bear and to bring the right technologies to the heart of their business. Just exactly what Zak's described. So it is frequently a part of M&A, day in, day out, and has been in some industries. I think about industries like aerospace and defence, where I've done a lot of work. It goes to the heart of that business model and goes back a long time.
Looking for a way to make a difference while you shop? Well, with Scope, you can. Scope is one of the national charities Deloitte supports as part of our social impact programme 5 Million Futures. Visiting any of Scope's retail stores or online shop helps to support their work to create an equal future for disabled people. Every pre-loved item purchased or donated funds Scope's vital services and helps keep millions of items out of landfills. It's good for people and it's good for the planet. Just visit scope.org.uk to find out more.
It's interesting you mentioned technology there, because it would be good to have a chat about that, which is obviously integral here at McLaren. It can be such a powerful tool, can't it, for improving efficiency and tracking key metrics and driving innovation. But clearly, Zak, I'm sure you'd agree, it's not a magic solution either. What sort of role does technology play in a turnaround from your perspective?
It's critical. I mean, at the end of the day, we're people first. We're in the technology business, but it's the people that use the technology, the right technology, advance the technology. But technology just helps you accelerate. You take it as an example. There's obviously technology on the race car, but then also with our fans. We have over 100 million fans, and in today's digital world, the world's going towards customization of everything. And so without technology, not long ago, we would just broadcast to fans. And then you do research, and 6 months later, you kind of see how you're doing. Now, in today's digital world, for good or bad, you're getting feedback from your fans via technology, instantaneous, pit stop by pit stop, pass by pass. And so it's great because it lets you know exactly where you are and then respond accordingly and customize. I think people are fans of Formula One because of the drivers, because of the technology, because of the racing, because of the off-track politics, whatever it may be. And with technology, you can then customize experiences for your fans and start to tee up, this person watches Formula One for this reason, and then you get into the different demographics and psychographics. And so technology allows you, from a fan base point of view, to have a very customized experience. Then of course you have technology which goes on the race car, and we're cutting edge, and that's critically important. And then same thing around sustainability. We've been a leader in sustainability from a Formula One point of view, and then finding the balance between wanting to be more sustainable, but at the same time, we can't do anything to compromise performance of the race car. So there's a natural tension. Sometimes things can be sustainable and they're great for performance. Other times, it's not the best performance solution yet, but we believe it will be. And so that's where we're working with Deloitte and the FIA to start carving out, hey, we want to go the direction of being even more sustainable, but we can't do it in the short term as a sacrifice against performance because the technology's not there yet. So how can we start to develop technologies that don't compromise our cost cap spend, but are the right investments to be making for the future?
Are you excited about the technology of the future and what's coming down the track?
It's unbelievable. Technology just seems to be speeding up.
Yeah.
And so who knows what the world looks like in 5 years, but it will be a more technically advanced world, that's for sure.
Interesting. And Pauline, obviously you've worked across multiple business areas and through different turnarounds and businesses struggling. How have you seen the impact of technology help turn around businesses?
Yeah, okay. So I think two sides to that. Number one, the front end customer client facing piece, which is what are you doing with technology to drive customer client experience in your products ultimately. And then secondly, the technology that underpins your organisation, providing you the data. When you look at the power of data to shape your organisation, I think it's pretty amazing. I think it's coming to what you're saying in terms of your fan base and your experience there. So without a doubt, we are seeing more and more investment in that area and more M&A that's driven by technology to underpin an organisation.
In the context of technology, I feel like we still keep coming back to this point around people and having the right people in the right roles and using technology in the right way. What kind of skills, personalities do you look for when you are trying to turn around business, and how do you find that balance between someone having the right skills from a technical perspective or a technological perspective, but then also the right cultural fit as well?
It comes to the point I said earlier on, which is I think you want that leadership around you, you want a balanced, you want different perspectives in that team. You've got to have that agitator. You've got to have people who want to change, who want to go on the journey with you. They've all got to be part of that to start with. And as you say, Zach, there'll be some people who won't want to come on that journey with you, but you want a leadership team that's behind you. Once you've made a decision as a leadership team and you've kicked that around, then everybody's got to be outward facing with that right message and that right mantra to the rest of the organisation. So the power of that leadership team, I think, is really important in cascading down the where you want to go in terms of that mission. I think you want a different range of personalities, different range of skills, but the agitation and the power of that leadership team together, being on that mission together.
Totally agree with that. Almost got to restate a little bit of what you said. Leadership team, I've got 10 people on my leadership team. They're phenomenal. We challenge each other, but when we do leave the room, we're all aligned. Even if we entered the room and we weren't all aligned, we get aligned. We challenge each other. So I think it's important to have a leadership team filled with opinions and leadership team that's comfortable, and you got to be prepared to listen to them. I think Sir Jackie Stewart, 3-time world champion, once said to me, and it's just stuck with me, when the type of people I like that he has around him are actually ex-military people. And I said, well, why is that? And he goes, they know how to take orders and they know how to give orders. And as simple as that is, I think all good leaders, it's not about just giving orders. You need to know when to take orders as well. And then to your point, cascading it down, we have 1,300 people at McLaren Racing. I have 10 direct reports. Those 10 direct reports probably have 50 direct reports. It's that next layer down that touch 600-700 people in the organization. They're the ones that actually have to pull through the culture and drive it, because I'm only talking to 10 a day. And then, of course, I'm talking to the team and roaming around. But it's actually that middle management, if you'd like, that I think are the biggest influence in driving culture and morale, because they're the ones that are kind of in the heat of the battle with the troops, if you'd like, on the shop floor, so to speak. And in our business, probably similar in other technology businesses, what I found is just because someone is technically good, they might find themselves in a managerial role. And there's a big difference between being a manager because you're a great manager and kind of being a manager because you're technically the best, but that doesn't necessarily, the qualities you need to be a great manager Actually, you might not even technically need to be that good. It depends what type of manager you are and who
Yeah.
you're managing, but it's more about getting the most out of your team.
So we've talked a bit about some skills that are needed, getting a turnaround happening, the use of technology. If we move into now looking at sort of sustaining that change and sustaining momentum, obviously the cultural change, we've talked a little bit about that, Zak, you've been touching on that. It would be interesting just to understand how you do unite a team or indeed an entire business or workforce through these challenging times and keep them engaged. Pauline, do you need a commercial turnaround first and foremost in order to affect a cultural change? Does one come before the other?
I think the two go hand in hand.
Okay.
I think the two have got to go hand in hand because I don't think you'll ultimately get the commercial turnaround and performance that you want without the culture coming with the organisation and going where you want the business to go. So I think you might get a short-term gain commercially without the cultural piece, but I think unless you address the hard bits of the culture that you need to change and the values of the organisation and where you want your people and your teams and how you want your people and your teams to feel about working, with the organisation, for the organisation, at the organisation, I think you won't get the commercial turnaround.
Yeah. And Zak, obviously you've been on both sides as a driver and also now as a leader. How have the skills that you've developed through your career positioned you for the role that you do now?
I think there's a lot of similarities between being a racing driver and a CEO. It's kind of the highest profile position, so that comes with you've got to watch what you do, what you say, how you do it, because everyone's kind of looking at the racing driver, the CEO, for kind of direction and representing of the brand, so to speak. Beyond that, you need to be a great communicator and a great listener. Think about when you're racing, you got to tell your engineers what you want, what you need, but you also need to know when to listen to your engineers, and you have to be a good communicator. Risk versus reward, and I kind of like having to make decisions on instinct. At times you can make mistakes and hopefully fix them as opposed to being catastrophic mistakes, but I think sometimes you can overthink, and sometimes it's nice to be like, you got to make a decision now, and if you trust your instinct, good business instinct. So being a racing driver is a lot about instinct, risk versus reward, understanding what the competition's doing, and also having a great team around you. It's life and death when you're in the racing car, not just winning and losing, but you got to trust that your environment is safe and that you get everyone's working together as a team. So I think a lot of similarities between being in the cockpit of a race car and behind the CEO desk at the office.
Mm. And Zak, you mentioned that point around it being a very high profile role, you being very visible. How do you look after yourself and deal with that kind of pressure and scrutiny that comes with being so visible?
Surrounding yourself with great people, of course, having some personal outlets, whether it's golf or I still race or play sports. People read books, watch TV. So I think, you need to kind of personally have some ways to kind of get away from it, but then also, I've got a great board, I've got a great advisory board, I've got a great leadership team, so I know I can go to them with issues if I feel like, I need some, other support on wrestling. And then I think you get better at it over time. The amount of stress I still carry, I think we all carry, but used to carry. And I always tell everyone, passion is great in business, emotion's very dangerous. And there's a very fine line between the two. But I think if you're emotional, you make irrational, emotional decisions. Passion is the sweet spot, which kind of neighbors emotion. Same thing my chairman always says to me when making decisions, Zak, there's a fine line between bravery and stupidity.
Yes, indeed. Got to be just the right side of that line.
Yeah, and I think the same thing with emotion and passion. Passion is definitely emotional as well, but if you kind of get emotional, then you don't think clearly. And I think we all get emotional, so what's important is to recognize when you are getting emotional, Don't send that email. Don't make the phone. Just sleep on it.
Yes.
I've learned how to sleep on things.
Yes. And that passion point, I guess, also links into the mission, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Because your passion is linked with the long-term mission and vision of what you're trying to achieve. Hopefully on a journey back to success, you'll have small wins along the way. Well, some small, some more significant. How do you balance celebrating wins with staying focused, keeping your eye on the long-term strategy? Have you got any views on that, Pauline?
Yeah. Well, I think you've got to celebrate the wins along the way, particularly when you've got a plan, you're going to that place, and you start seeing just some of the small indicators on the way to that place, that mission. I think you've got to share them with everyone. You've got to get them cascaded down and make sure that everybody feels part of that, and that they might not sound like big things, but actually they're really, really important to celebrate. So I think getting that celebration is really important, and communicating that with the entire team, not just keeping it as a select few, but sharing that with everyone. And I think it's where you can make a difference as a leader, just sharing your personal sort of perspectives on some of those accomplishments as you go through.
Yeah. What's your view of that, Zak?
I agree. You definitely have to celebrate them along the way with everyone.
Yeah.
You need to recognize those that contributed and identify why you won, so you can talk about it and try and replicate it and improve upon it, and then move on, right? Like, don't celebrate forever. But celebrate, recognize, understand, go again.
Yeah. But take the time
100%.
Yeah.
to enjoy the win, right? I guess
100%.
that's important.
Moving on slightly, thinking about the process of turnaround and kind of having an end goal in mind, in your experience, has that goal always been static? Or do you feel like as you've progressed and had smaller and bigger wins along the way, the goalpost has moved?
I mean, I think in our business it's pretty clear what we're trying to achieve. Win the world championship, have the best partner brand portfolio, have the most engaged fan base, and be the best place in the world to work, right? So I don't think that ever changes. So the goalposts don't move, but how you get there inevitably does. And then I think I've always kind of tried to be a kind of reverse architect of, all right, that's where we're trying to get to in 3 years, 5 years. And then what do you have to do today to get there? And I hear people sometimes talk about, do you think short term or long term? It's all long term, broken down by a bunch of short term goals and objectives, but I've never don't understand why you'd make a short-term decision that wasn't driving toward your long-term goal. Certainly it is. So I think it's about 5 years out. What do you have to do in year 4, 3, 2, 1? Then focus on the one. What do I need to do this week, next week, the following week? And it all leads. So I've never seen a kind of a separation between, or a difference between, short-term, long-term decisions are all kind of one and the same. They're just a series of steps to get to your final destination.
Yeah, and I guess it's more of a case of that short-term, day-to-day agility might change in terms of how you get there, but ultimately,
goalposts change daily, but you kind of know the direction of travel.
Yeah. Would you say that's similar, Pauline, in an M&A perspective, or would you say you've seen more of the end goal shifting at times?
I think your end goals might well be the same, but I think you can get knocked sideways sometimes on the path of getting there. COVID's a great example of that, but other things which can impact your market, your customers, and sort of where you think you're going, you're like, oh, blimey, we didn't see that coming. I think there are things that can knock you sideways, and then you have to adapt. But your end goal is still there, and your end mission is still there.
So before we get to the big question, we always like to kind of round off with some tangible advice for anyone who might be listening. What advice would you have for any leaders who might be navigating the challenge of turning things around? It feels like this huge, overwhelming, mammoth task. What would your one bit of advice be?
Mistakes are okay. Don't make the same one twice.
Love it. Pauline?
Okay, I'm going to be stay positive. keep your perspective, whether it's golf. I don't think golf does it for me, but I'm a golfer, and it's usually the worst thing for my golf.
Different stress.
Yeah, exactly. And in the words of Ted Lasso, believe.
Oh, Ted Lasso. Brilliant.
Iconic.
So to wrap up the episode, it's time to answer the big question. Zak, if I come to you first, what does it take to turn things around?
People, communication, transparency, because it's the people that's going to help you turn it around. Even if regardless of what business you're in, and it's like we might need to sell more product, but it's going to be the people that get it in their hands or get the consumers more excited. And so it's people, communications, trust, transparency is what got us where we were, because we didn't have any of that stuff.
Right.
And then that's what turned it around.
Fantastic. Excellent. Pauline, yourself?
I'm going to go the magic of the mission, underpinning that, the culture, which is ultimately the people.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So, but the magic of the mission underpinned by all of that.
Wonderful. Zak and Pauline, thank you so much for joining us
Thank you
today,
for having us.
and for having us here, Zak, and all the best for the season.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We're taking a break for Easter, but we'll be back in May with another big question. So don't forget to hit follow or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening or watching. That way, you'll be alerted whenever a new episode drops. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad, original music by Ali Barrett.